Hi guys, this is Courtney Milan. I'm happy to be here and I have some questions that I was told that you wanted answers to. The answer to that is yes. I am a huge reader of historical romance, and in fact, I started reading historical romance long before I thought about writing it. The point when I first started thinking that I would write historical romance, I had already I'd already read something like probably 1,000 or 2,000 historical romances already. So by the time I started writing, I had already read Julia Quinn, Eloisa James. I could go on and on and on and on. Right now, I think some of my favorite writers who are writing at the moment are Sarah McLean, Tessa Dare, Rose Lerner, Alyssa Cole, Elizabeth Essex, and Teresa Romaine. But I really still love and read the genre a lot. Okay, I have read so many books over the course of my life that trying to pick two single characters is so hard. Um, so I'm just going to mention two that are historical characters that I like and two that I think are characters that I relate to now. Historically, um, one of the first female characters that I really, really, really liked a lot was the character of Éowyn in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And I liked her a lot because you may have noticed that there's almost no women in The Lord of the Rings. There's like none in The Hobbit, literally none. But when Éowyn showed up on screen, she just kicked ass. She was awesome, and I really, really, really loved her. And so I spent probably a year and a half when I was about 12 pretending I was Éowyn. Let's pretend that didn't happen. No, actually, let's not. It's fine. Um, in terms of my favorite male character, I think the one that I empathized with most when I was younger was a character called Miles Verkosigan, who is in a series of books written by Lois McMaster Bujold, and he's a very different sort of person. He's 4'9". He has some teratogenic issues that mean that he looks very different from the norm. And he lives on a planet. This is a science fiction series. He lives on a planet that has a lengthy history of fearing mutation, and that all plays into how he interacts with the world and how he refuses to let anyone see him as anything different than what he is. Um, which is an incredibly smart, extremely difficult, in some ways, individual. Just a very, very great character. In terms of novels that have been recently written, Minerva Highwood from Tessa Dare's A Week to Be Wicked is she's just fantastic. I just empathize with her so much along the way. In terms of favorite male characters, again, that's a difficult question. Um, I recently read Nalini Singh's Heart of Obsidian. I know I'm a little behind the time on that, but her Caleb in that book is just amazing, and I really liked him. Okay, here's something that if I see it in the back cover copy, I will pick up a book at any point. No questions asked. I won't read anything else. I won't read anything. I'll just pick it up automatically. And that is Girl Dresses as Boy. I just love that. I don't know what it is about it, but I just love that instant. Maybe this is going back to Éowyn again. I just love a girl who looks at a society that says, we're not going to let you do this stuff, and says, screw you, I can do it. I'm going to show you. I'll pick that up like that. For those who don't know, initially, um, I was a scientist. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and chemistry and a master's degree where I studied theoretical physical chemistry. And then I went to law school, so I was a lawyer after that. And then I started writing. So that's sort of my path to being a historical romance author. And I just think that any of the tools that you have, you bring with you as a writer. You never get away from it. So the fact that I have training as a scientist means that I spent a lot of time thinking about the history of science and what my characters would be experiencing and what they would know. And I ask myself questions like, well, did they have the germ theory of disease at this point? Yeah, not yet, maybe another 5 years. And all of that sort of plays into how I see the world. I also, here's an arcane fact about the US legal system. No one else in the world cares about what the law in Britain was in 1792, except the United States. because we adopted our Constitution in 1792, and because some of our Supreme Court justices believe that we should figure out what the Constitution means based on what people thought it was in 1792. So US lawyers are kind of the only people in the world that will care about British law in 1792. And so I know a lot of random stuff about British law in 1792, or at least I knew it before I was, before I became a writer, and I brought that with me, and since I enjoy reading about it, I continue to read about it, and it works its way into my plots. Well, okay, so this was not, I just have to say, this was not a super conscious choice on my part. As it happens, at the point when I started reading historical romance, almost all of what was being written about Europe, and specifically England, and specifically Regency England. I pushed myself about 12 years out of the Regency when I started writing my first books into the Victorian era, simply because I wanted to write a little bit, you have a little bit more class conflict going on at the time. This is, the 30s is around the same time as the first Voting Rights Act in Britain, and I wanted to have that as a backdrop. But aside from that, it was not a super conscious choice. I wrote that because that's what everyone else was writing. It's because it's what I was reading. I have been thinking about it more, and if you continue to read my books, I think you'll start seeing the effect of those thoughts, but we'll see for now. So one of the themes that really I feel suits itself to my style and that I enjoy writing about is I like writing about women who prevail under extraordinary odds. And it was a really tough time to be a woman in the Victorian period. Women had less rights in the Victorian period than they had had in many of the periods up until then, and that's true for a number of reasons. First of all, the Industrial Revolution meant that you started having factory jobs, many factory jobs, in which you'd have sort of the women's work right here and the men's work right here, and women and men would be doing the same thing, and women would be getting like literally paid less. Still happens today, but at least we try and pretend that it shouldn't happen. It's a time period when you saw a lot of society breaking down. You know, blacksmiths stopped being able to blacksmith as much. People who used to be the village cobbler were suddenly being undercut by a factory that could produce hundreds and hundreds of shoes for a fraction of the cost. And that made it a very difficult time for women. It made it a difficult time for almost everyone. And so I like writing about that period of time because it's a time in flux. And I think in many ways we are also living in a time today when a lot of things are changing. And I say that because, you know, in my lifetime, and I like to think of myself as not that old, I've seen the internet come into play. I've seen phones go from something that was stuck on a wall with a little dial to something you could hold in your hand and take with you, and it would tell you sports scores when you want it. And some of those changes are amazing and wonderful, and some of those changes are really scary for a lot of people. And I think that this is, for me, writing in this era is a way to explore what it's like to live in a changing era, and how to prevail during it. Okay, so first of all, I want to push back against the idea that sexuality was vastly different than what we see it as today. In some ways, I think the main change is simply that people are more open about the sex they're having today than that they are actually not having sex. And the reason I say that is, so first of all, I think there's a danger in judging what a period was like just by going to a handful of etiquette books and looking at them and seeing what they say. Because I guarantee you nothing is written in an etiquette book as, do not do this, unless someone was doing it. And if you look in the Victorian time period, first of all, they had more porn in Victorian England than at any other time. And if you read some of the porn of the time period, a lot of it was squelched because they had serious obscenity laws. But if you read some of the porn, it's very instructive. And some of the non-porn. So one of the random things that I found was this really super creepy Victorian anti-masturbation handbook that described all the ways that children who masturbated died. I'm telling you, they didn't write those kinds of things unless people were actually doing them. From my perspective, looking at our current time period, one of the things we have in the US is this lovely system where states get to decide for themselves exactly, not just states, but cities get to decide for themselves exactly how they're going to run things. And so one of the big debates in the United States is whether children should be taught about sex and given basic sexual education in schools. And that might surprise people to hear that it's a debate outside the United States because almost everyone thinks it's a matter of public health. But some states in the United States feel like it's a question of religion and should be left to parents and not to the state. And one of the things that's quite clear from all the research that follows from these different jurisdictions is that in states where you don't actually tell people much about sex, they end up having more of it. And that's kind of unsurprising because if you think about it, our bodies are very driven by a biological imperative to procreate. And if you don't actually tell people about it and tell people to think about it, shockingly, they just do it. I would never bet on any society not having sex. The only question in my mind is how much they talk about it, not whether they're having it at all in the first place. So I just want to push back on that. I doubt that my heroines are particularly promiscuous or particularly interested in sex for the time period because, come on, women have always had clitorises. That's the way it works, right? I know not everyone agrees with me on that, but I just think there is far too much evidence that people back then had sex, had lots of it, and liked it. Didn't change. Still the same. Whatever. Sex scenes are actually really tricky. Because unless you just want it to be a description of somebody sliding into somebody else and, then it's done, there has to be some kind of emotion behind it, and the sex has to feel organic to the characters and where the relationship is at the moment. So I'd say that for any sex scene, I try to make it something that feels natural to the characters, that is about what they would be doing at the time, and the sex should say something about who they are and where they are, and not just be sex. So I hope I do that right, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, this is one of those things that's like sex. I'm just going to ask, no, I don't think so, because I think that if you look at feminists of the time period, they were actually pretty feminist. This was really brought home to me at one point last summer when I decided I was going to read, for really random reasons, mostly because I was procrastinating. But I decided I was going to read a romance novel from 1879. And I literally picked a random romance novel. The way I did it is I went and I looked at a list of romance novels that I found online from the time period, and then I cross-checked it against a list of books that were publicly available through Project Gutenberg, or I think this one was available through something else, but it had been scanned. It was I could read it online. Okay, so those were my only two criteria: written in 1879 and available online. And so the book I picked was by Florence Marryat. It was called Her World Against a Lie, and like I said, written at random, or picked at random, and I started reading it. And I have to tell you, if I published this as a modern book, people would say, oh, there's no way people like that did not think back like that. But I'm going to read you some sections from it because I think this is instructive as to what women have been like throughout time. There's two characters here. One of them is Mrs. Horton, who is, by the way, what we would call today a man-hater. They would have called her a man-hater then. She would have preferred the term, I eat men for breakfast. Mrs. Horton, as I found out later, researching Florence Marryat, was basically an authorial insert. And then the main character of the book, who is Delia More, who is a woman who is married to an abusive husband. In any event, Delia More goes to visit Mrs. Horton and is asking for her advice, and she says, oh, Mrs. Horton, I am so very, very miserable. All the hardness fades out of the elder woman's face as she lays her hand upon her friend's head and pats it soothingly. I'm sorry to hear it, Delia More, but I could have told you as much long ago. What else can you expect when you put yourself in the power of a man? Don't you know that their tender mercies last just as long as their admiration of you, and that a worn-out woman is much the same to them as a worn-out suit of clothes, only fit to be chucked away? Yeah, that's what someone was saying An author in 1879 wrote that. And let me tell you, Mrs. Horton was not written to be the man-hater who gets her own at the end of the book. She spends the entire book basically saving everyone's butt every time it gets in trouble. She does get married at the end to a man who we would call a henpecked husband who's going to do whatever she says, because that's what's going to make her happy. And the book contains lengthy discussions for women about what you can do if your husband beats you. Here's how you can get around the law. Here's how you can go to a magistrate and get a protection order. I mean, it is like a handbook for what to do about an abusive husband. I had not expected it, but every time I underestimate what women back in the 1800s were doing, I do research and I discover that they were far, far, far ahead of their time for what we think of as their time. And I think that that is because a lot of the things that they were doing, a lot of the contributions that they were making, they didn't end up in the history books because it wasn't women doing them. You can find it, or because it wasn't men doing them, sorry. You can find them if you look. But if you don't look, and you just go by what you've been told, you're going to miss it. So no, I don't think my heroines are feminist for their time. I think my heroines are as feminist as feminists were in that time. And I think that one of the reasons I'm writing them the way that I do is because I strongly believe that women need to reclaim those stories of ourselves, the ones that have been erased from time, the ones that we no longer hear so much about, because I think that's important. I think it's important for us to remember that throughout all of time, there has never been a point where some women haven't been struggling for equality, for rights, for reasonable treatment. They've never not been struggling for it. And the only question is, when did people start listening? So that's kind of my take on it. You know, there are some things in my work that I do think I feel like I'm making a statement about. And I definitely think that I try to integrate more feminist themes. The aristocracy stuff, I don't know. I just don't find people who are straight up dukes that interesting. I just don't want to write about them. I don't know what that is. I mean, I can write somebody who has a title, but I have to do it sideways, right? Like, it has to be like Robert and the Duchess were, where he's like, yeah, I've got this title and it's total bullshit. Why didn't anyone give it to me? So I don't think I'm not trying to make a statement. It's just not that interesting to me. And so that's how it works out. Well, first of all, that's not quite true. Of the 4 novels, Robert is the hero in one of them, and he is a duke. Oliver and Free are main characters. So Minnie has been growing up on her aunt's farm, which I think she would count as more modest origins. So for the first one, half and half. For the second one, Oliver and Jane. Oliver grew up on his parents' farm. He was, his father, he's the bastard son of a duke, but he was not really acknowledged by his father, did not grow up in wealth and privilege, and I think that shows in his upbringing. Jane, I would say, is moderate gentry, but no more. Violet and Sebastian are both upper class, so there is that. And then Free and Edward in the final book, Free again is Oliver's sister, and so she also grew up at a farm, and she doesn't have a duke as a father. She's just the son of a former pugilist and a governess who are now on a farm. Edward is complicated. I'm just going to leave him at complicated. So I think it's mixed. I don't know if the novellas are... Who are the novellas? Yeah, I guess maybe the novellas are... I think the only reason you have more noble characters in the full-length books is the full-length books are following this series of interrelated people. And that sort of... That interrelation, which started with the Duke of Clermont's 2 sons, the legitimate one, Robert, and the illegitimate one, Oliver, meant that we had that injection of the nobility in the first place. But other than that, it wasn't super planned. This is one of those other things I don't really do on purpose. I guess what it comes down to is that every time I see a romance trope, I kind of think that for me, what it feels like is it's like someone telling me what to do, and I hate being told what to do. And so if somebody says, you know, if you have X, then you must do Y, then my immediate response is try and find a way not to do Y through any possible means. And so that means that just the way I write naturally, when I see myself starting to write X, I look at it, I'm like, oh, I'm going towards X. I don't know about X. I don't know about X. I don't want to, if I do X, I have to do Y. I don't want to do Y. How do I not do Y? Ooh, I could do Z. So that's just sort of the way I work internally. I don't know that I consciously set out to do it. It just happens. Only one word, huh? Contentious. Yeah, okay, so the book that I just finished is a contemporary romance, and Adam Reynolds is secretly my favorite. It's not even really that much of a secret. Part of it is that I have been writing historical romances for so long, and, you know, I can swear in them a little bit. Like, I think there's one of my books has 2 fucks in it, and another one has, like, a shite. But people didn't, it wasn't, you didn't swear quite as much back then, and I actually have a really foul mouth. So Adam Reynolds was my way to indulge in a character who swore a lot, like a lot, a lot, a lot. And that was really fun. So I counted just before I published the book. Like I said, the previous book had a grand total of, the maximum number of F-bombs in any prior book was 2, and in this one it was 157. Okay, it's not exciting. It's exciting. Not really. Okay, sorry. Okay, I had to do a little count with this one. Okay, so in the governess affair, Hugo has to be asked to come to bed. Serena asks him, but she needs his help to get really into the act. Seduction count, probably 0. Not really seducing on either side there. Okay, Robert and Minnie and the Duchess were... nope, but that would be seduction count, still 0. Oliver and Jane in the heiress effect. She shows up at his room, wet, and tells him she didn't get another room in there. Okay, seduction count 1, seducer Jane. Okay, next book is Countess Conspiracy, Violet and Sebastian. Nope, no seducers there. Free and Edward in the suffragette scandal. Dang it. Okay, he flirts with her, but she's the one that keeps sending him letters about puppy cannons after he leaves without actually having sex with her. So seduction count, let's make that seduction count 2 with Free as the seducer. My 2 seducers are Free and Jane, both women. Which one is the most likely to make you weak in the knees? Well, you know, I have to say they are both women, and that makes the question a little harder to answer. But between the 2 of them, I think Free would be the one who would kick my knees out from behind me first, and that would probably make me weaker in the knees. So let's go with Free. Sadly, I am boringly right-handed. I do play chess, but extremely badly. Thank you very much for this. This is actually a really long video, so if you sat through it all, give yourselves a round of applause. And by the way, I just noticed I have a little helper right back here. That's my cat. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the video.